welcome to Newsmakers for this Monday, May 27, 2024. And with MPPs heading back to Queen's Park this week before taking off for their 4-month summer vacation, there's no shortage of things to discuss when it comes to the Pink Palace. And to do that, I'm very pleased to be joined by one of our favorites here on the show, CHCH political analyst Keith Leslie joins me now. Keith, I could have brought you on to talk about the booze, the Greenbelt, an early election call, but no shortage of things to dive into. So let's dive into it. What did you make of the news today, the global report here? The Chief of Staff to the Ontario Premier, Doug Ford, routinely relied on a personal email address to facilitate government-related communications. Pretty damning opening line from that global news report.
Absolutely, especially from a man, this chief of staff, who told the Integrity Commissioner he did not use personal email accounts for Greenbelt related or for any government related business. And of course, we also learned today, at the same time as we learned that this, the global news got the actual emails, seeing them going back and forth, personal email accounts, government business being conducted. At the same time, the Privacy Commissioner said she was going to open an investigation into the Greenbelt communications and emails, specifically because she'd had not only the NDP raise a number of issues with her, but 19 other similar complaints that during the whole Greenbelt process, that there was a whole lot of government business being conducted on personal accounts in the Premier's office, in the Minister of Housing, and between developers, people who wanted specific parcels of land removed from the Greenbelt, some of whom got that. Some of this communication, why are they using private or personal email accounts for this? Clearly, it's to avoid scrutiny, it's to avoid public detection, it's to avoid freedom of information laws. So this is highly illegal, quite frankly, to be doing this kind of thing. So it's quite shocking to hear that it's so widespread that we heard a bit about when those reports came out last summer from the Auditor General and the Integrity Commissioner about the whole Greenbelt scandal. Remember, this is where certain developers were given absolute preferential treatment, and they were able to get certain parcels of land that went in value from tens of millions of dollars to $8.3 billion almost overnight. And then the government had to eventually back down, and Premier Ford admitted he'd made a mistake, and they withdrew all those lands, put them back into the Greenbelt for protection. But the scandal was there, and it's still coming out, bits and dribs and drabs about how this was communicated. And the Premier always said, his office didn't learn about which lands were coming out until basically a day or two before it was presented to Cabinet. Here we have clear evidence that the Premier's office was communicating with developers about which specific parcels should be taken out and which ones they wanted to take out and develop. It's exactly the kind of thing that should not be going on.
You mentioned the direct contradiction to what Sackville told the Integrity Commissioner, quote, "I do not conduct government business on my personal email." And then in a letter, he said it would be inappropriate. Oftentimes we hear about it being more about the cover-up than the crime. How worried would Doug Ford's office be right now about this cover-up and potentially reaching Doug Ford? I mean, we're talking about his chief of staff. That's a pretty big position when it comes to politics. And by the way, Sackville made $340,000 a year to do that job last year, up from the $180,000 he made the year before. I just thought I'd throw that in. But how worried would Doug Ford's office be about this right now?
Well, very. I mean, let's face it, going back, a special report from the Privacy Commissioner, it sounds kind of innocuous almost, but going back to 2013, a similar special report from the Privacy Commissioner on the government emails and how they were handled in the McGuinty Liberal government's gas plant scandal of 2011. It took till 2013 for the special commissioner, or the commissioner to issue a special report, and it turned out government emails had been deleted wholesale, and Dalton McGuinty's chief of staff went to jail for this. The OPP launched an investigation, took him out of the courtroom in handcuffs. He went to jail. He got a 4-month sentence. He served just over a month. But nonetheless, a man of absolute complete integrity up to this point. He was in his 60s. He went to jail for wiping government hard drives, seemingly, again, to avoid freedom of information, to avoid, government communications, that they canceled these gas plants for political reasons, ended up costing the taxpayers over $1 billion.
And that, that's not to say there's the taxpayer effect. There's the criminal charges, somebody going to jail, and the fact that the Liberals haven't really been able to recover from that report. I mean, that was 2013, and we're talking about a Liberal Party that doesn't have official status right now. I mean, this has the potential to be very, very bad for the Premier government, for Premier Ford.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a real cloud hanging over them, as is the RCMP investigation into the whole Greenbelt scandal itself. But we do have to look back. The Liberals didn't suffer an immediate punishment for this. Even though David Livingston went to jail, Kathleen Wynne, who was premier at the time and was not implicated too much in the gas plant scandal, even though she'd been around the McGuinty cabinet table, she got a majority government the next year.
Yeah.
Then, of course, come 2018, things completely changed, and they lost official party status, and now they're on a basic extinction level event. They lost 2 elections in a row where they didn't even get party status. So for the Liberals, I think maybe that integrity thing, came home to roost, but not immediately. For the Ford government, though, this is still so ongoing. The fact that the Mounties are still looking into the Greenbelt scandal and haven't issued any sort of statements or reports. The OPP turned it over to the Mounties last August. So this has been going on quite a while. People are wondering, why haven't we heard anything? The Liberal leader, Bonnie Crombie, put out a release this week and held a news conference, demanding an update from the RCMP. Well, I'm sure that didn't even cause a meeting at the RCMP headquarters, but it at least, get the issue back in front of the public. And I think that's what the opposition parties are clearly intending and continuing to do. And right now they're asking for the Auditor General and the Financial Accountability Officers looking at, just all that's going on with this government.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about something that they did do last week, and that was, expanding booze. And, I had a conversation with some buddies this weekend. We were hanging around, having a couple of beers. And, I said, it really wasn't that hard to get these beers. We didn't have to go too far. There was enough places that we could get them. Yet we see Doug Ford continue to push. He says this is what the taxpayers want. This is what they want. They want easier access. They want more access. They want more options. He might be right, but, for me, it's not that difficult to buy booze. What did you make of this announcement, the timing of this announcement? And is this just, trying to get that popularity up a little bit more?
Well, of course it is. And when asked, of course, people say, I'd like more modernized, liberalized sales of alcohol in Ontario. I'd like to be in Quebec or in the States where I can walk into virtually any store or gas station and, get a 6-pack or a 12-pack or get a bottle of wine. We've wanted that for a long time. But when you ask people what their top concerns are right now, that doesn't even come on the list. Let's be honest here. It's, overcrowded emergency rooms. It's hospitals that can't admit people. It's the cost of living. It's homelessness. It's all these sorts of social issues, the housing crisis. People are not top of mind going, boy, if only the Doug Ford government could advance that modernization of liquor laws by a year and spend hundreds of millions of dollars to do it. I don't understand the political motivation behind it at this point, but the fact that they're spending so much money to give to the beer store and to the big companies, they're giving 10% discounts to Loblaws and Walmart, Costco. These companies are going to be able to sell a whole lot more booze. Why? What is the rush that we would have to spend literally hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayers' money, giving it to these big corporations just so they can then sell us more beer, more wine, more spirits, at a more convenient thing? Yeah, people sure they like more convenience, but it's absolutely not what's needed. And I think most people, when they actually sit and think about it, would you rather have $600 million spent on more modernizing and more convenient to be able to buy beer and wine? Would you rather have that spent on healthcare, getting more doctors? 2.2 million Ontarians don't have a family doctor. I think there are other priorities that this really calls into question. But why the government, why they felt the need to do it now to me is a huge question. I just don't understand the political motivation, other than there's that talk about, perhaps he wants to clear the decks and trigger for an election. Well, again, if there's an election scheduled in the spring of 2026, and these laws were scheduled, the agreement with the brewers was scheduled to end in the fall of 2025, that would have been a perfect time leading into the election to, liberalize your, say, promise kept. We've modernized the liquor laws. Well done. But why they're doing it now and spending so much money to do it, I just don't understand politically.
Well, you mentioned the $600 million. Ontario Liberals, Bonnie Crombie had a press conference today. She gave out some estimates on how much more the government is willing to shell out. She said, citing more than $1 billion, which includes the payout to the beer store, LCBO rebates, foregone licensing fees. Now, Liberals say their estimates are conservative numbers. How accurate do you think the Liberals are here? Are they just trying to find, $1 billion is a lot of money. You've kind of taken a look a little bit at these numbers. What have you seen from them?
Well, again, there's the $225 million that the government said right off the top, we are giving the beer store $225 million to break this agreement a year early. Premier Ford said, it's not going to Molson and Labatt, the big owners of this, the big international corporations that own the beer store. He said it's going to the frontline workers. The finance minister, Mr. Bethlen Falvey, he said it's probably going to go to help Brewers Retail, the beer stores, formerly Brewers Retail, keep open some stores that are less successful once all this competition comes on the line. So even that is questionable. Well, okay, how's the $225 million going directly to the workers? It's not. I don't care what the Premier said, that it's going to the big corporations. Then there's apparently another $375 million in fees that they currently pay to the LCBO, that the beer store currently pays to the LCBO. Those are going to be rebated. So I don't want to make people do gymnastic math here. That's the $600 million figure. Now the Liberals have gone into it and said there's also the 10% discount that's going to be given on LCBO prices to Walmart, Costco, Loblaw, Metro, the big box stores and the big grocery stores. They say that's $150 million. And then the Liberals also said, if Ontario charge a licensing fee for all these new outlets that are going to be retailing booze, that they're foregoing $300 million there. So that's how they get us to $1 billion. And everyone loves the phrase billion-dollar boondoggle when you get into politics. So I think there might be a bit of a stretch there, but their numbers are not, their estimates, they say they're conservative. I think they're guesstimates at best. But the bottom line is hundreds of millions of dollars, perhaps at least $750 million, maybe even more, going to the big corporations, the big companies, and this government always seems to favor the big guy over the little guy, despite Premier Ford's always insisting of being for the little guy. It's the big guys that are being really rewarded here. And for what? To get more chances to sell us more booze. Why would we need to pay them so much money just to do that? I would think they would be happy to be able to get those concessions and get that availability now. Again, the money being spent here is it's astronomical. And again, there's so many questions. I say the government's ties to big corporations. The chairman of the LCBO, Carmine Nigro, he's also, we happen to be the former chairman of Ontario Place, but that's another whole issue. But he's a developer who also has ties to Walmart and Loblaws. So he's going to be in charge. The LCBO is giving out millions of dollars or foregoing rebate to these very companies he had business ties with. The conflict seems kind of obvious here. So again, the whole thing, it just baffles why we had to have this a year early and spend so much money to do it.
And of course, Carmine Agro there got a special shout out before the press conference on Friday, singled out by Premier Ford at the press conference, thanking him for his work behind the scenes. Premier Ford wouldn't.
He was also a Ford wedding guest, right? He's pictured at the Ford. All this stuff, the close ties to the developers that just seem so inappropriate. This is where you see the dollars coming home to roost. I mean, there's just so much money involved here, and shouldn't most of it be going to something like healthcare or, the housing crisis?
And Loblaws isn't a very popular company right now. You would think that now wouldn't be the timing, right? You got Loblaws, Shoppers Drug Mart, all these deals that they're getting, lots of money going to these private corporations. Doug Ford wouldn't commit to an early election call. You mentioned this a little bit earlier. Bonnie Crombie was pressed about it as well. Merritt Stiles says she's ready. She thinks her party is ready to go. I'm not sure how true that is, if the NDP are ready for an election, just to be honest here. But Bonnie Crombie was pressed. How ready would you say the Liberals are for an election? How ready is the NDP? Would the opposition parties be ready for one?
I think it'd be a real shock to their system right now if they had to go. Of course, they're trying to get into readiness mode, but they certainly wouldn't have all their candidates ready to line up and be nominated, and that's a huge chore, just vetting candidates, getting candidates, lining them all up, making sure they're going to be right for the party. And money. Do they have the money? I think most of them have wiped out their debt now. I think the Liberals and the NDP have wiped out their debts from the last campaign. But for the Liberals, of course, a big concern is, they're polling around 25%, above the NDP at around 21%. But do they have the ground game? Do they have the feet on the ground? They were supposed to make the Milton by-election earlier this month a real close call, and it just wasn't. The Tories took it with 48%. So that's hardly a protest vote against a government. And so the Liberals, I think they've got to be concerned about how low they did in Milton, right next door to Mississauga, where Bonnie Crombie was mayor for so long. And it's one of those 905 ridings that you have to win if you hope to form a government in Ontario. So I think the Liberals are really quite concerned right now. I mean, most people still have no idea that Bonnie Crombie is the Liberal leader in Ontario. They've got to go out, they've got to raise a lot of money for an election campaign. And the same for the NDP. I don't know how, they say they're they're raising more money from small dollar donors, but still, it cost a heck of a lot to run a campaign. The Tories are, of course, flush with money, and they're holding a lot of fundraisers. So financially, they'd be in a position to do it, and the opposition parties would absolutely be, caught on their back foot, as it were. But I think, you'd get up to speed as quickly as you can. But I think the voters would they have a tradition of punishing premiers that, sort of take that kind of advantage, looking for an electoral advantage. They know if you're going now, it's only to, avoid the Greenbelt scandal or the RCMP investigation or whatever, it's for your own political advantage. And we saw way back in 1990 when David Peterson, went a year early to try and get his majority before a recession was going to hit Ontario. We ended up with an NDP government. He lost his own seat that night.
Let's take a look. You mentioned that poll. These are some numbers from a poll from Abacus Data and the Toronto Star. It was conducted earlier this month, just a few weeks ago. They find that Doug Ford and the PCs continue to lead Bonnie Crombie and the Liberals by a 13-point margin. That is down 2% from their previous poll, though. You see the NDP there at 22, Greens at 9, undecided, seeing a huge jump month over month at 28%. I mean, that number right there, the 28% jumps out to me, and the 39% jumps out to me as well, because obviously 39%, not a majority, but still strong enough to maybe get Doug Ford another majority government in Ontario. What do you make of those numbers from the polling this month?
He absolutely, 39% would absolutely in Ontario get you another majority government, especially if the NDP stay up at 22%. The Liberals at 26%, as I said, they're polling well, but their vote is very inefficient. It's concentrated in the urban areas. And so that'll get you some seats in the urban areas, but you have to get out in the rest of Ontario. So I think those numbers are actually, they might be a bit encouraging for Bonnie Crombie as a new leader, but when they do the polls as to who is the Liberal leader, no one knows. So I think they've got a real challenge ahead of them. The NDP falling back to 22%. 20, their traditional 18 to 22%. That's horrible news for them. They're the official opposition in Ontario. They should be challenging a government, and right now it looks like they'd be challenging the Liberals for official opposition status again, and the Liberals have a good chance of taking it from them. So I think, realistically for both parties, they need to get their numbers up, they need to get their finances up, and they both see Doug Ford at 39%. I mean, that's another majority government. Now, we're 2 years away from a scheduled election, and as we all know, polls can certainly change a lot within a month, let alone in 2 weeks, or in 2 years, excuse me. But that the big number there that you said, the undecided, perhaps that's numbers that are being shed by the Ford Conservatives, that they hear more and more of things they're concerned about with this government, and they're going to, they're not ready to vote for the Liberals. They don't know who they are. They're not ready to go NDP again. So they're going into that undecided category.
Yeah, I mean, the 28% obviously a big number. You mentioned Bonnie Crombie. Maybe the only name recognition she might have among some people could be from conservative attack ads that have been running basically in Ontario nonstop since she won the nomination. It's the same ad. I wish they updated it for the NHL playoffs, but it's the same ad they were running months ago. If you're going to run it, keep it fresh. So if I looked at all those numbers, if I'm looking at this, there's a potential of an RCMP investigation, maybe coming to more fruition in the next few months. Why would I be discouraged if I was a PC not to call an election right now? It seems like the right choice. Why wouldn't they want an election right now?
What's the gain? 2 more years? You're only halfway through. So if you call now, you've got another 2 years guaranteed, and then you could chance for another 4. So to do it now for a 2 year, like a 2 year extension, it seems I just don't see the advantage in it. There's a lot of talk about this tradition that Ontario has, that election results turn out that Ontario likes to have a different government at Queen's Park than it does federally. And of course, in October 2025, the PCs are expected to win the CPC, the Conservative Party of Canada. They're not progressive conservatives. Pierre Poilievre is expected to win that election in October 2025 unless something drastically changes between now and then. And so the popularity of Poilievre and the Conservatives has Ford concerned that, they don't want to be running against a Conservative government in Ottawa. It's much easier to run against a Liberal government in Ottawa, and it's always convenient for a provincial government to run against a Liberal government. So there's the theory that they want to, that Ford is concerned that they don't want to, be up against a Conservative government in Ottawa. I find that that's just a lot of speculation, and I don't know any Ontario voters, and I voted in Ontario all my life, that go into the booth going, well, let's see, if Trudeau's in Ottawa, I better go Conservative here, I'll vote for Doug Ford here. I just don't see it working, voters' intentions aren't that way. The results may turn out that way, but I don't think it's any reason for the Conservative government to look down and go, oh my gosh, we better pull the plug now so we're not running against Poilievre. And again, when you look at the two types of Conservative government, the Progressive Conservatives versus the CPC, and from the comments Doug Ford has made up till this point, and there's no love lost between him and Poilievre, I don't think he'd have much trouble campaigning against a federal Conservative Party of Canada government led by Poilievre.
What are you going to be watching? We mentioned the 4-month vacation that our MPPs take from Queen's Park, June 17th to September 4th, just like the school kids in the Ontario here. So what would you be looking for in the next 3 weeks here before they sort of shut it down for the summer? What's going to be catching your eye?
Well, again, I don't see what their priorities are. They're going to push this liquor bill through, or liquor changes through, but they're going to take a lot of heat for it. So unless they, the Premier, when pushed about this election speculation, keeps saying, he wouldn't rule it out. I think he's playing with the media because he wants him to talk about anything but the problems facing Ontario. So it's a bit of a distraction for him. But I think in the end that the media are just, they're barking up the wrong tree here. I don't think Doug Ford wants an election right now. I see no benefit to him in calling it. And so I think we're at a stalemate. What do we watch going forward? All the Greenbelt, I think it's going to be more and more, some of it might be dribs and drabs, and, it's hard to get people's attention during the summer. But once we get this special report from the Privacy Commissioner on the Greenbelt communications, which is just more fuel for the fire if there actually is an RCMP investigation, or if they even at least tell us there's one, it's more fodder for that. So I think the whole Greenbelt scandal is still something that's going to hang around the Ford government the next 3 weeks of the House sitting and over the summer break.
Well, Keith, I won't take it too personally about the dog barking up the wrong tree with my questions here about the early election. I'm not too hurt about that. Keith Leslie, always appreciate checking in with you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
My thanks to Keith Leslie for joining me today, and my thanks to you as well, because we could not do the show without your support. Hey, while you're listening to us, watching us, however you found us, make sure you like and subscribe to wherever you got us, whether that's on Apple Podcasts, you can find us on Spotify, and yes, the video form on YouTube, or you can just go to chch.com/podcast. My thanks to Mike Corsten for directing today's episode, and one more time, thank you for tuning in. From all of us here at CHCH, I'm Louie Butko. Have a great day.